Okay, so apparently the last video I did had no sound again. There's a button on these headphones, and it's counterintuitive. If it's pushed in, it's muted, and if it's out, it's not muted. I would think it would make more sense to be the other way around, but nonetheless, that's the way it is. And I think last night when I was checking it to make sure that it wasn't muted, I muted it. No real big loss. The little nice gray thingy that came with these headphones has managed to disappear, and without it, the microphone was picking up way too much garbage anyway. So, whenever, if you watch one of my videos where I just had the pink thing without the fuzzy on it, it's very hard to hear. It's just bad, bad, bad sound. So hopefully this will be a little bit better. I tested it, and it sounds a little bit better, but hopefully I'll get another one of those little fuzzy things soon. Because what I did here was I just bought a little roller paintbrush thingy from Walmart and tore it apart and took this piece off and put it on here, and I think it's helping, but I don't think it's perfect. So, okay, so the last video I did was on Han Kang and her novel, The Vegetarian, which I have not finished. The point of that video was to respond to the first part of that book. And what the story essentially is about a woman and what appears to be a very traditional Korean wedding, Korean family, Korean marriage, who is fairly repressed and submissive when it begins, and she very quickly, as the title of the book might suggest, becomes a vegetarian. And this causes a problem because this is a very meat-forward family. And it leads to increasing levels of violence and disturbance until the first part ends with her having what appears to be kind of a mental breakdown. I don't want to go into the plot details because it's, but the main reason to be looking at this book in the first place is, in addition to it being a good and interesting book, and a book that won the Booker International Prize, the author has also won, or is going to win, the Nobel Prize in Literature for 2024. Apparently, it'll be awarded on December 10th, but it was announced on October 10th. So, unbeknownst to me, I came across this on the internet and thought, oh, cool. So I went to Barnes & Noble and searched around, and this is the only book by her I could find. Unbeknownst to me, like I said, she had just been announced that day. So my assumption is that within the next couple of months, probably several other of her titles will appear, particularly her more recent work. She did an interview, apparently, when she found out she was going to receive this prize. She was somewhere having tea with her son, and they approached her and told her she'd won the prize, and they asked her a couple of questions. And one of the questions they asked her is, where should someone start with her work? And for those of us in the West who have not made any practice of looking at Korean literature, this is probably a good question because I'd never heard of her. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that among Western readers. But she did mention The Vegetarian is one place to begin. It is one of her more celebrated books internationally. But she did mention that a couple of her more recent work is the better place to start. So, I'm starting with The Vegetarian because that's the one I've got access to, and that's the one that I read. I've now read about half of it, and I have to say that the second part answered quite a few of the kinds of questions I had about the first part. Like, one of the things that I knew, I could tell just from reading it, I mean, the reviews will tell you this too, But from reading the book, I could tell that the whole concept of becoming vegetarian and the defiance of her husband and the defiance of her family and the defiance of tradition that she was doing by becoming vegetarian was allegorical in some respects, and that the violence that it engendered in other places obviously has some thematic importance in terms of women's place in society, patriarchy, feminism, and all of those kinds of issues. That was perfectly clear. But nonetheless, I am not familiar with current Korean society. And I questioned how accurate this was for a Korean family in 2007, the early 2000s, when this book was published. And I still don't have a definitive answer to that question, but that question seems less relevant to me because the book makes it pretty clear in the next part that even some of the bystanders to this were shocked by the degree of violence that happened and to what happened. So, yeah, I think it's clear that this is not necessarily the norm of what might happen in a Korean family, but in a more traditional, more conservative-minded family, perhaps, particularly with the father. And that strikes me as being deeply allegorical in terms of where some of these traditional societies have come from. Not just Korean society by any means. I mean, most of the world, if not the entire world, has a deeper patriarchal past than it currently is at the moment. And then some would question, with things like the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the other things that have happened, whether or not we've really escaped from some of that patriarchal past. And I think that's a very good question. So some of this seems almost prescient, almost like looking forward as much as looking backward. And so it's certainly, I think, relevant today, regardless of what the day-to-day reality might be of the average young woman living in Korea. Which, again, these events in this book are not intended to be normative. I think they're intended to be something of an extreme, but done for an allegorical position. And what's interesting about that is it's extreme, but also not extreme at the same time. Maybe it's a product of her style, but it seems very flat and very everyday in the way that it's told. And I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that in a negative way at all. It's not extreme or melodramatic. Things aren't depicted in some kind of, oh my gosh, breathless kind of way. Like, to take, for example, Stephanie Meyer's and what did she write? Twilight. The Twilight stuff that she wrote. I read like the first 4 or 5 pages of that when that first became a sort of a phenomenon. And just the breathlessness of it, I couldn't take it. I put it down. It has nothing to do with whatever happens later. It's got nothing to do with any of that. It's got nothing to do with the movies, nothing to do with any of that. I just couldn't take the breathlessness of the style. Just not my cup of tea. And so all I'm saying here is that the style here is much, much different. It's much less melodramatic, more slice of life, more just, this is the way it is kind of thing. Even when it's dealing with potentially difficult things, like there are some places that deal with what is almost certainly sexual assault, and it's dealt with in a very, again, flat way. It's not dealt with in any kind of melodramatic way, it's just like almost like a factual reporting, here is what happened kind of thing. And in a way, some of that style makes it even more horrific because just like, Hannah Arendt talked about, the banality of evil, this is kind of what I'm seeing here in this book is that the evil things that happened to this woman because of her choice, the bad things happen to this woman because of her choices, are just banal every day. They wouldn't make the newspaper, they wouldn't make the documentary, they wouldn't be on the news. They're just banal. But this kind of banal violence, this kind of banal everyday horrific action is what the life of someone who is oppressed is in a society like this. Not necessarily like current Korea, I must say, but of the family in which she is in. So one interesting thing is how important is being vegetarian to the book. I don't think it is particularly important, although it is possible that this connects to kind of ecofeminism and those kinds of ideas. I don't know. It's outside of my field of knowledge. It's just a possibility that's brought up by somebody else, which I think is definitely potentially interesting. And there certainly is some kind of connection about, the potentially oppressive nature of the meat industry, the oppressive nature of a patriarchal system, the forcing of a life onto women, onto animals, etc., by a patriarchal or a meat-eating society. So there's definitely that possibility working here. In any case, the second half of the book goes into sort of the fallout of what happens in the first part, and you find out more about how other people perceive what was going on, and you find out, some of the further ramifications, and does this choice to become vegetarian, is it a singular act of defiance, of a commitment to not oppress animals, to feel for all life forms, empathy, and those sorts of things, or is it a deeper problem that's leading to true mental illness, disturbance, and possibly even psychosis? Those questions become more relevant as the novel progresses. And like I said, I'm about halfway through. I hope to finish it by tomorrow or Monday, and we'll see. We'll see. So I will definitely give a report when I finish it and let you know. As for now, I would definitely recommend it. I would say it definitely is a book worth looking into, and it makes me interested to check out other things that she's written, particularly the more recent stuff that she claims is a better route into her work, although she does mention this one as a book that could be a route into her work as well. All right. Thanks.